me. So first of all, Mike and Derek, thank you for inviting us to participate today. And I want to acknowledge Pam Hicks, who basically handled all of the near as much fun if it had not been for Pam. And one of the, I think the greatest things for me on the trip was not necessarily what I saw, but it was the people that I was with, and I thoroughly enjoyed the sort of camaraderie that we were able to develop with people that, quite frankly, many of whom I had not had an opportunity to spend much time with, Mark, and I really appreciated having had that opportunity. For me, as it related to the trip and the purpose of the trip, for me, it was bracketed by something that happened on the very, very first full day and something that happened on the very, very last day that I was there. On the very, very first, the full day, we were there. We went to ENN. It was an energy technology company. And we looked at what they were doing in underground coal gasification, what they were doing in trying to develop technology to generate from coal to petroleum fuel. But we had a luncheon, and at the luncheon, I was sitting next to the head of technology. And she had gotten her PhD at Penn State. She had spent 10 years at Chevron, and she'd been called back to China within the last 4 years to work there at ENN. And so she knew a bit about the U.S. And at the luncheon, she turned to us and said, "What do you think about the elections that you just had?" And we talked a little bit about the elections. "Well, how do you think that's going to change the balance of power in the Congress with Republicans taking over?" We talked a little bit about that. And then she asked the question, "Do you think your form of government is as efficient as ours?" And we talked a bit about efficiency. And in the middle of it, we said, "Well, you guys can build stuff, and you guys can make things, but we have freedom and liberty, and those are extremely important. And when you look at between the various goals of government, between liberty and efficiency and equality, we think liberty is extremely important." And she said, "You guys put too much stake in liberty." That was in the first part. The last full day that we were there, Representative Strama and Representative Eisler and I and others had a chance to go see the mayor of Pudong province. And when you look at his business card, you can tell he's a high-ranking muck in the Communist Party. And we're sitting in this cavernous room, and he and I are seated next to each other with a table between us and everybody else seated on the outside. Got translators behind us, and after we go through the formalities and we get to ask some questions, I asked him, I said, everywhere we go, they say that you have emissions targets in your 5-year plan. There's not a province in the country that's close to making them. What are you going to do in order to meet your targets? He said, we're either going to close down businesses, we're going to move some out of the province. If that doesn't work, we'll take more drastic action. They're like, what the hell is more drastic action?
Well, we know what that is. We actually do know.
And so what we see is, I went to China, I think as probably most of the people on the trip did, having read Tom Friedman and others, telling us what great things the Chinese were doing and how much further along they were than us. And I came back, I have to say, saying, not only is it great to be in Texas, but the Chinese are not only not farther than us, but in terms of who's going to get to the finish line first in terms of developing the next generation of clean energy technologies, it's going to be led by Texans, and we can talk about why I think that later. It's going to be led by Texans, it's going to be led by Americans, because what I saw in China, I don't think is sustainable at all. And what they're able to do, if it depends upon throwing a bunch of folks at it, because they got a bunch of folks, and money, because now they have all of ours, they can do that. But they're not creating any new technology, not creating any new wealth, not creating any new ideas. That's going to come from somewhere else. What they can do is what we saw, they can copy what the rest of the world is doing. And I realized that may not have been what the sponsors of the trip wanted me to learn, but that is what I think I learned. Anyway, Barry.
Well, it's great to be with you all. Thanks for putting it together. This is really the first time we've all been back together since the trip, and that's why you heard all the cutting up and cackling over here. We were swapping stories. Michael and I had a great time with all of our colleagues, and I only wish Brian would have been with us because he hadn't had anything to do over the last couple of weeks. He looks remarkably refreshed, given everything that's going on with him. A couple of reports that came out in the last couple of months, I think, really underscore the importance of this topic today. the Energy Information Administration put out their report in mid-December that talks about what consumption of electricity and fossil fuels will look like between now and the year 2035. And barring any change in statute, not regulation, but statute, coal will continue to have a dominant role in the generation of electricity. Now, it goes down from 45% to 43%, but it's still likely to be our dominant source of generation for electricity. And as our country and our state continues to migrate more and more to electric vehicles, electric production, substituting electric motors for hydraulic motors, that is going to be an important aspect. Back in November, the International Energy Agency put out their report for the next 25 years, and they have a couple of scenarios. One of them is called the New Policy Scenario. And in that, they talk about the same 25-year time frame, and they basically project that China will triple its consumption of electricity between now and 2035. And they point out that in the year 2000, China consumed half of the energy that we did. Now they consume more than we do. And it's undisputed, though the Chinese tried to dispute it for quite some time, that China is the largest CO2 emitter in the world. And by their own admission in the meetings that we had, their chart path is more or less vertical from now till I don't know when, whereas ours comes down. And in fact, the economic recession has put us in a position where we don't reach 2005 CO2 levels until about the year 2027, given the downturn in the economy. So coal will remain an incredibly important part of our mix. And so part of our mission was to see exactly what the Chinese are doing in this particular regard. I also wanted to go because I've been giving a lot of speeches over the last 6 years about that Chinese person that's eating our lunch economically and technologically and innovatively, and I didn't find them. I mean, what I found were a couple of projects that were interesting. I think as Michael alluded, they seem to have the ability to marshal people and capital in a direction and do it in a very fast way. When you're a totalitarian government, you can get by with that, right? You don't have to worry about what people say or about relocating folks or taking folks' land or really, is this the proper allocation of capital? Because there's no metrics to decide, am I going to get back a reasonable return on what I'm doing? A couple of things were incredibly impressive. The Beijing and Shanghai airports were more magnificent than anything we have here in the States. I think you have to recognize they were built for the Olympics. And as a result of that, this was an opportunity for China to display to the world. And by the way, everything was written not only in Chinese characters, but also in English. So you know the target audience that they had for the Olympics. The bullet trains were magnificent. Some of the best I've ever seen, but yet we also saw buildings sitting out in the middle of the field with no one in them. And they seemed to be falling apart, and at one point we were on a superhighway that ended. And we literally, my wife didn't believe this, we literally had to go cross country through the dirt in our bus, following people in front of us as we charted our own path. We were passing people coming, and at one point, as you recall, we were going against the traffic on the wrong side of the road, and it was acceptable behavior. I mean, it was just sort of a person taking charge of a situation that had deteriorated pretty far. I don't know if that was before or after we were stopped by the uniformed gentleman who told us to go back the other direction. So I think we need to be wary of what's going on in China, and how do we think about them in terms of advancing these technologies. You know, I was trying to draw an analogy. I used to travel to New York a lot in my previous life, and I think China is to the U.S. sort of as Queens is to Manhattan right now. I mean, you think about it, if you're familiar with that part of the world, you know, everything, all the work happens in the boroughs outside of Manhattan. That's where they repair cars. That's where they prepare food. That's where they do all the things that are either too expensive or undesirable in Midtown. To some degree, I think we're letting China do that globally for us, right? I mean, we're letting them work on things that we don't want to do because of the pollution consequences or because of the capital required, or, you know, moving villages of people to build a dam which we're not gonna do here. So